Good morning. I'm going to ask us all for about a minute or two. Get up and meet somebody, and then we'll sit back down. So let's stand up and meet somebody. So as I begin my talk this morning, I note that Dale and Debbie are with the Bering Drive Church of Christ in Houston, Texas this weekend. Did you say, oh no? Okay. They are sharing with the Bering Drive Church what we've been doing here the last, I'm going to say 40 years, studying and being an inclusive community regardless of economic status, regardless of racial status, regardless of the status of gender, and regardless of the status of one's sexual orientation. When I came to Stanford in 1985, I did not know where my journey was leading. But part of coming here was due to my friendship with Dale and Debbie. As a church family, we have been blessed. We've been blessed with the leadership of people like the Cochrans, the Bohannons, J.G. and Joanne, and others, and now under the leadership of the Williams, the Johnsons, the Bosicos, and Debbie Pauls as one of our shepherds. We've been blessed with deep leadership over the years. We are not a perfect church, but I've never been part of a spiritual fellowship that is so open to something that is to me amazingly simple and yet amazingly complex. And this is it. None of us have it fully together. If you are human, you will mess up at different points in your life. But, and I add, there's nothing like being together in a place that is safe where we don't have it all together. But for the grace of God. I believe for many of us in this faith community, this is a safe place because it's a safe place to ask questions. It's a safe place to grow at one's own pace. Sometimes we annoy one another, to be honest. It's a place where it's okay to both disagree and still worship together. And it's a place to experience the sufficient grace of God for all. I am honored by some of my Burns Tavern's friends. And you all know I'm a Burns Tavern guy. I've been deeply touched by their love and concern for each other and for me. I tend not to invite people to church. But when a friend desires to visit my church family with me, I'm honored and humbled. And in turn, I should note that I always offer to go to their place of worship if they have one. That's only fair. I'm also honored by the presence of my chaplaincy manager, Reverend Rebecca Sala. Rebecca's here. I asked her to speak for 2 or 3 minutes, and she said no. But I want to say a couple things about Rebecca. Though we come from different religious traditions, Rebecca has illuminated the sufficient grace of God in ways unimaginable to me as a member of the chaplaincy staff at Stanford Hospital. So Rebecca, thank you for your leadership and for your friendship. A few minutes earlier, Grant declared the text. I got that in again, Grant. He read the text of 1 John 1, 4 through 10. 40 years ago, this coming May 6th, I checked the date. I was preaching from this text in 1984 at the Newark Church of Christ in Delaware. That day, the title of the sermon was Being Human, Not Being Afraid to Fall. That Sunday morning during the sermon, I fainted. Yeah, I did. I fainted. Apparently, they thought it was part of the sermon illustration. And they left me on the floor for 1 minute. May it not be so today. In thinking about this text, I can no longer separate this text of 1 John from the context of my present life, of my church family's life as we contemplate a new minister, in the context of my work as a chaplain at Stanford Hospital and as a professional storyteller. Really, I can't separate it from the context of what's happening both in our country and in the world at large. Verses 5 through 7 of 1 John reminds us that the battle of life is between light and darkness. Now, I really want you to get this. The battle is between light and darkness. It doesn't matter if the battle is in the home, if it's in a hospital room, if it's in a lecture hall, if it's in a Bible class, or if it's in the sanctuary. This battle of light and darkness is in the halls of academia. This battle of darkness and light is in the halls of the Congress as we speak, of the White House, and in every single local and state legislative body in this country. This battle of darkness and light is in Stanford City Hall. What one cannot do is to claim the light and yet walk in darkness. John says, if we walk in the light as he's in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, purifies us from all sin. What I'd like to do is put some flesh on what it means to walk in the light. It means loving those who are perceived as unlovable. Whether they're unlovable or not isn't the question. If they're perceived as unlovable, the battle between light and darkness is learning how to love them. It's the story of Simon the Zealot and Matthew the tax collector. The tax collectors collected taxes from the Jewish people to give to the Romans, which Matthew was. The Zealots were sworn enemies of Rome. And any Jewish person who collaborated with Rome usually were killed by zealots. Matthew the tax collector and Simon the Zealot became disciples of Jesus. Imagine Democrats and Republicans. It's the story, and this one is just beginning to blow me away. It's the story of Jesus encountering Judas, the one who betrayed him. And Jesus loved the one who betrayed him. It's the story of an Israeli learning to encounter what it's like to be a Palestinian who's lost their homeland. It's a Palestinian learning to encounter what it's like to be Jewish, fearing that you may be wiped off the earth. It's a pro-life person encountering those who are pro-choice and anti-death penalty and learning to love them. It's a pro-choice person encountering those who are anti-abortion and pro-death penalty and learning to love them. It's a market-oriented person encountering social justice warriors who they don't think gets capitalism and learning to love them. It's social justice warriors encountering market-oriented capitalism people and learning to love them. Light and darkness does not live in a vacuum. Light and darkness is not solid. Light and darkness is fluid, and it's greater than any of us in this room. Light and darkness battles for each of our spirits. And the only way that light and darkness can be found out is in the highways and the byways of politics, of education, of where you work, of where you live, and how you live in your life, how you live your life in relationship to other people. Sitting with a family in a hospital room watching a loved one die, or a patient witnessing their loved ones watching them die. The light and the darkness for me becomes, for lack of a better word, concrete. Sometimes in the form of just 3 questions. And I imagine there are more questions, but these are the 3 that have jumped out to me the last couple of years. 1, have I been loved? 2, have I loved? And 3, did my life make a difference? In a deep sense, I think what each person desires to know when they're dying is this: have I been part of the illumination, or have I been part of the darkness? I'd never really put that together before, and I could be wrong, but considering this text, it seems very real to me in this moment. The second part of this passage is about sin. Sin is a tough topic in our society, particularly ours. We don't talk about sin that much. The first thing that jumps out to me from John is this: none of us are perfect. None of us have it all together. I may be wrong in this, but I think the one primary reason that much of Christianity and much of religion really is when they consider themselves to be of the light and everybody else to be of the darkness, there's only one term for that: spiritual arrogance. When we are spiritually arrogant, it turns people off. I'm going to go back to Burns Tavern. One of the hallmarks of Burns Tavern, for me at least, is that practically everyone I've met there considered themselves not to have it all together. I should be honest, when they say they're messed up, they use much more colorful words. So if you come with me, you need to take whatever lens that you have and be prepared for every word in the book. Recently, I had dinner with some Burns people named Cahal and Kathleen Burke. Rebecca and I were at Burns yesterday, and she met Cahal and Kathleen. During the dinner, the gist of the conversation was how altogether we were not. As I sat with Kathleen and Cahal last week, I can't convey to you the sense of safety in being able to talk with each other about how altogether we were not. It was at once very dense and simultaneously very, very real. Really, it was just 3 people discussing their humanity. And in discussing their humanity, there was light in the room. I think that the Burkes, and indeed the people of Burns Tavern, I think they get it. At Burns, many people have confessed to one another, maybe not even knowing that they're doing it. At Burns, no one claims to be sinless. Indeed, sometimes the sin is openly stated. Not in a proud way, but more like, this is who I am. I'm flawed. I'm human. And that's something that we talk about in this church family. We're all flawed. We're all human. In this church family, we've learned, or we try to learn, to love each other by not just what we agree with one another, but even more how we disagree with each other. And there's only one common denominator for that: God's grace. Much of this is synchrony for me. My dad was a bartender for my Aunt Mildred's restaurant in Gretna, Louisiana. One of the reasons I think I love Burns Tavern is that the bar counter in Burns Tavern is eerily reminiscent of the bar counter at Mildred's restaurant. And today, some 60 years later, on some level, as I listen to the people at Burns have conversations, I sort of envision the kind of conversations my dad had as a bartender with his patrons. Maybe church should be like a bar, where one can share without shame how messed up their life is, and knowing that it's a safe place to come home to. That even after one's darkness has been shared, that your friends will still see the light of God's grace in your life, sometimes that you cannot see for yourself. John speaks of Jesus as the light. That light overcomes the darkness. I don't know how it overcomes, but that's the mark of one who claims to follow the Most Holy, that you live in light. My dad died January 29, 1979. He'd suffered from cancer from 1972 until he transitioned. There are two images of my mother she shared with me about his death. One was the night before he died. My dad called out, "Dolores, the train is coming, Doe." "What train?" my mother said. "What train, Herman?" "The train is coming, Doe." And then my dad trailed off to sleep. The next day, my father called out once again, "Dolores, Dolores, I see the light." "What light, Herman?" The light's coming for me, Doe. The light's coming for me." And my mother said, because I think she knew what was happening, "Herman, go to the light." My mother took a nap. And when she woke up, Daddy was gone. The call this morning is this: the battle between light and darkness is very real. It is not an amorphous battle. There is not a corner of this planet where the battle between darkness and light isn't being fought. It's being fought around us, in our homes, in our schools, in our politics, between countries, and between people who formerly were friends. You and I cannot do it on our own. It requires being connected to this light. The question is, how will you and I respond to this battle? Will the darkness win? Will the light win? If your eyes and my eyes remain on the light, then the people will know. May it be so.